Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second webinar, which will cover the dietitian role-specific training for the produce study. I'm Kimberly Drelly, a clinical dietitian at Seattle Children's Hospital IBD Center.
Hi, and I'm Lisa Opapari-Aragon. I'm one of the co-principal investigators on the produce study.
And we've been working hard behind the scenes to come up with this protocol in a really systematic way that will hopefully be clear to you all and address the many questions that we know will come up throughout the study. So without further ado, we'll jump into the training. Next slide. Our main objective is simple. We want to review the role and responsibilities of the study dietitian across each study time point during the study, or during the 32 weeks of the study. Next slide. And we'll start by looking at the key dietitian responsibilities. The dietitian will be responsible for educating the family about the specific carbohydrate diet and the modified SCD. They will be conducting education in a manner that's consistent with the study protocol that we've outlined for you. The dietitian will be ensuring that participants have their diet and nutrition questions answered and the resources they need to implement the study diets at home. They'll be conducting anthropometric assessments and communicating any concerns to the primary GI provider and study PI, working in collaboration with the GI provider to monitor weight and intervene as appropriate per the study protocol. The dietitian is a positive support and ally for the family in making this behavior and lifestyle change. The dietitian will be reviewing the Eureka platform to stay informed of the patient's symptoms prior to each study checkpoint. And they'll be working with the research coordinator to ensure availability for study appointments per the study protocol. Next slide. The dietitian will also be teaching the participants how to complete the 3-day diet diaries that we'll talk about, and ensuring sufficiently detailed information about amounts and brands, etc., is recorded on the diet diary before it is sent to Seattle Children's Hospital for the nutritional analysis. Dietitians will be reviewing all of the 3-day diet diaries and the subsequent nutritional analysis and addressing any nutritional concerns with the family in a timely manner. The dietitian will be evaluating nutritional adequacy of the patient's intake, including any need for supplements like vitamin D or a B complex vitamin, for example. They will be assessing diet adherence and problem-solving any barriers that come up along the way. What's preventing you from eating on the diet, when you're out and about in the world? Do you need to batch cook at home so that you can have snacks on hand at all times? Things like that. And then the dietitian will be recording required study information on the visit-specific paper, which is called the CRF, or the clinical research form. And then they will give that form to the research coordinator for data entry into REDCap. Next slide. So our education and the timeline starts with the baseline enrollment visit. Next slide. And you can see here on this timeline that we have for you guys, the baseline visit should be a standard of care visit. And at that point, the participants will hopefully be enrolled and consented. They will be taught on their app. And then a huge piece of this will be the diet education. Next slide. I mentioned that first bullet point already, that it'll be an in-person visit and the following people should be present. So the participating parent and patient, the site PI or other designee, the dietitian, and the research coordinator. This visit will take approximately 1.5 hours to 2 hours total in length. So the patient should be ready for a longer visit in order to cover all of the education pieces that are needed. And specifically, the dietitian component will include the standard nutrition assessment. Then it will move on to diet education for starting either diet arm, and then a review of instructions for completion of 3-day diet recalls. And then lastly, it'll involve ensuring follow-up and everyone is on the same page for the upcoming touch points. Next slide. Prior to the visit and preparation, the dietitian should review the baseline SOP or study operating procedure, which we've created in much more detail for you guys and we'll have for you before you start. It will give an outline of what should be discussed, like we'll cover today, but in much more detail. Materials needed for this visit include the baseline CRF that the dietitian will complete, the blank 3-day diet log, and then a copy of all the printed produce education handouts, which will be given in a folder. And the research coordinator should have this ready for the dietitian. During the handoff from the research coordinator to the dietitian, it'll be important to review the participants' randomization groups, so which diet the participant will be starting on, so everyone's on the same page. And this should be indicated on the education packet so that the dietitian can also ensure that they tell the family. And this will also facilitate what education you will give the family for which diet. Next slide. Next, when you're with the family, you'll complete your nutrition assessment per your center standard. You'll want to make sure to gather the following information. I'm sure you gather some sort of variation of all of these things, but for the study purposes, we really want to ensure that you're capturing the type of disease. So does the patient have ulcerative colitis, indeterminate colitis, or Crohn's disease? What are their anthropometrics like? What's their height, weight, and BMI? And what's their weight history or BMI history leading up until this baseline visit? We want to capture any pertinent nutrition labs, including the inflammatory markers listed here, the hematocrit and hemoglobin to see, do they have anemia and what type? And if they've had a vitamin D25 hydroxy level checked, we want to ensure that we capture that. We also want to capture pertinent medications and supplements, including probiotics. Are they on a supplement like vitamin D or curcumin or something from their naturopath? Be sure to write those down as well. Or are they on something like Booster Ensure, for example? We also want to capture any oral supplements. And then what's their stool output like? What's the frequency? What's the consistency? Do they have blood? Are they waking at night? As we do expect those symptoms to change throughout the study. Next slide. It'll be really important to take a detailed diet history. So yes, we want to do our typical, what foods do they eat, what foods do they like. But in addition, we really want to assess what meal dynamics are like with the family. So who cooks at home? How much time does the family spend currently on meal prep? How are meals eaten? Are they together? Are they eaten on your own? What are the family's resources for food? How often can they grocery shop? Where do they grocery shop? Who plans to eat on the new diet? Will the whole family be together or will it just be the patient? We know that the diet can be most successful if all family members participate and if everyone's in it together. And it can be really fun that way also. And we want to assess if the patient avoids foods or is on any exclusion diet already. For example, if they're vegetarian, if they're on like a low FODMAP diet, if they're on any type of elimination diet that could make it even more challenging to follow the SCD or the modified SCD. Do they have food allergies? Are they allergic to nuts, eggs, any staples of the diet? And then does family have an equipped kitchen? Do they have maybe a yogurt maker or a great blender that they can use to make almond flour or nut butters, for example? And then can they easily access SCD foods? In our country, it's much easier now to find foods that are compliant with on this diet. But if they live far away from a grocery store, how feasible will it be for that family to adhere to the diet? Next slide. And then you'll jump in after the assessment to the diet education. So key points to think of during the initial education are focusing on what you can eat versus the restrictions. I always love to highlight, you love different meats. Well, you can have all the meat or, steak, chicken, eggs that you want on this diet as well. Within reason, I don't tell them to have steak every day, right? We want to keep our core principles as dietitians in check too. Not eating red meat every day. And then like all changes, you want to emphasize that this will take time and practice, and you won't be an expert right away. There's a learning curve, but there is a great support system in place for patients starting on the diet. Families should anticipate increased time for shopping and meal preparation. For batch cooking, maybe they want to cook everything on the weekend ahead of time, or like when they cook 1 to 2 meals during the week, so they're really going to focus cooking on the weekend. And there will be an increased food budget as well for buying things like almond flours, whole foods versus processed foods. Next slide. Then you'll jump into providing, we want to make sure that families know why we are doing this diet and why we think it works. So an explanation is needed about the STD and the rationale. So the theories up until this point are that complex carbohydrates, polysaccharides, will be broken down into smaller peptides. And the premise of the diet, or in IBD, is that intestinal injury will occur, leading to poor breakdown and absorption of these carbohydrates, which then feeds undesirable bacteria, which then grow. The bacteria then ferment, leading to and produce byproducts of methane and CO2, which may then further exacerbate and contribute to clinical symptoms and increased intestinal injury. Next slide. You should share the bigger picture or the theory per Elaine Gottschall, who kind of really got this diet going. The SED allows foods with simpler carbohydrate like fruits, fructose, which then leads to starving out the undesirable bacteria and then replacing the undesirable bacteria with the good bacteria through diet. We want to emphasize that we do not know the true mechanism of action, but these are the theories up until this point. It'll be important to define the terms legal and illegal foods. Illegal foods contain ingredients that are not allowed on the diet due to either the carbohydrate content, like I mentioned, or just patient trends over time of poorly tolerated foods. Legal foods are those that are allowed per the specifications above. They're the simpler carbohydrates. Next slide. It's important to explain that the diet can be nutritional adequate on the SCD, but we do need to focus on how to make it nutritionally complete. If one's eating from all food groups, for example, and fruits, vegetables, proteins, legumes, nuts, seeds, different fats, the diet can be nutritionally complete. But most patients still will require vitamin D and or calcium supplement because the dairy is limited, and we already know that kids with IBD do exclude dairy frequently. The patient may require a multivitamin with minerals or B complex vitamin in addition. It's important to emphasize that eating too much of one food can elicit symptoms. For example, I've had a patient that was doing the stages of the diet kind of in a more traditional SCD way and was only really eating meat and cooked vegetables, and she ended up eating a pound of beef in one night and, of course, had a very bad stomachache, as you would anticipate with eating a pound of beef, ground beef. So I always say, try and get variety from each food group and you'll feel better. Share with families that it's easy to be a junk food SCD follower, consuming kind of the prepackaged, quote unquote, legal foods. It's easy to, just eat the fruit leathers and the packaged cheese and the packaged Lara bars, for example. But like I said, a diverse diet is essential. A diverse diet will elicit more variety of bacteria, which is desirable. Next slide. Next, you'll review the diet handouts. So these should be in the packet that you give to the family, and they can be accessed through the nimble.org website, which is kind of our go-to website for the study. You'll go to nimble.org, and then under the produce tab, you can download the study materials. And I'll talk about most of the study materials that are up on the website today, but we have a few that are not quite up on the site. For example, the yogurt making handout is still in IRB approval state, but should be up soon. So we tried to prioritize kind of the most important handouts to go over in the initial visit first. So you want to ensure that you cover the SCD detailed summary. So you'll either be talking just about the SCD for those that are randomized into the SCD arm, or you will talk about the SCD plus the modified SCD for those that are going onto the MSCD arm initially. You will review this diet in detail, and if they're on the modified SCD, you will also review in detail the box on the back of the page that indicates what foods are allowed on the modified SCD, and there's 5 added foods. For the modified SCD, you'll want to explain the rationale for the recommended amount. We wanted enough to be added each week of these foods to distinguish between the SCD and the modified SCD, but we didn't want so much that the diet would not retain the core aspects of the SCD. Next slide. Then you'll jump into the stages. You'll explain the purposes of the stages is to start with the most easily digestible foods, and it also changes the microbiome. We go into a lot more detail on our initial webinar of the nuts and bolts of the SCD if you want to learn more about what to say for the stages. But it's important to emphasize moving through the stages quickly. So patients will start for either diet on the first stage. They will be on this first stage diet for 2 to 3 days, and then they will advance to the full SCD. The modified SCD will then be the kind of the third stage of the diet advancement, and patients on the modified SCD should reach this stage by day 5 to 7. So they'll go first stage, then full SCD, and then the modified SCD 5 foods will be added. It's really important to tell them that they should reach this stage by 5 to 7 of the diet and should not go longer. We can run into nutrient deficiencies quickly if they're just hanging out on the initial stages, but we tried to make it a robust diet and focus on just kind of more easily digestible foods initially to more advanced foods. You'll then look at the weight loss prevention handout. Review in detail this handout in detail if the participant is at risk for malnutrition or if they've lost any weight recently. This handout is key to helping with the weight gain, and when families follow kind of the recommendations outlined on this handout, they will maintain their weight or kids will gain weight. You also should review this handout just briefly if a patient is not necessarily at nutrition risk. The concepts on the handout can really help with satiety. If a kid's just eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and lean meat, they're going to say they're hungry all the time. And looking at that handout and reviewing kind of the recommendations can really help with that. Next slide. The next handout is the tried and true meals. You can review this one briefly because it's more of a tool that's in there for families to look at home. Our parent partners in the study have created this handout with their tried and true favorite recipes. So it's good to highlight this handout so family knows that, okay, these recipes have been tried by several families. They're their favorite bread options, their favorite meat options, baked good, etc. The snack handout is also really important to help with satiety and with weight maintenance. Kids should be eating 3 meals and several snacks a day on this diet. For those on the modified SCD, it's important to find ways to incorporate added foods and snacks that could work with the modified SCD. For ideas for that, you can look at the tried and true meals handout of how you can modify some recipes to be compliant with the modified SCD. And then the yogurt making handout is really essential. You'll want to review the recipe and process for making the yogurt in detail. It'll be important to discuss the appropriate probiotic strains and vessels to make the yogurt. They don't have to have a yogurt maker, so you'll go through that. Explain why the yogurt is an important and essential part of the SCD, including its role in providing probiotics and supporting a healthy microbiome. Also, a great source of calories and the main source of calcium and vitamin D. So I always have families make the yogurt with whole milk or even organic whole milk with heavy cream if kids can tolerate it for the calories. And then the recommended intake is 1 to 2 cups per day of the yogurt. A lot of kids don't like the yogurt because it's more bitter than Yoplait and the things that they're used to, for example. So I always say try it with granola, honey, and fruit. Try it in a smoothie. And if neither of those work, then you'll cook it in baked goods or you'll put it in a curry, for example. A lot of savory dishes will also call for the yogurt in place of like sour cream, for example. Next slide. And then We have the guide to label reading. So this highlights kind of what foods you want to avoid on a food label and what foods are better to look for. You can go through an example, and I always find this helpful in clinic, of a label of a prepackaged food that the kid loves, like goldfish crackers, for example, or Cheez-Its or Chips Ahoy. And you can look at, okay, what ingredients on here are STD legal? And you'll find that most of them are not. So you just want to educate on what to look for and how to be a savvy label reader. Our brand list for STD favorite brands is also helpful. The parents have highlighted in this research team what brands of flour, for example, sauces, baked goods, they enjoy using. Next slide. And then we have the social activities handout. So you don't have to go into this in detail if running short on time. This handout might be more helpful at the follow-up visit. So we have the supplement handout, which is also important, but might be more helpful at follow-up visits after the dietitian has had a chance to review the nutrition analysis results when you're doing the follow-up phone visit. So you can mention that it's there, but that you might talk about it more in the upcoming visit. And then we have the STD resources handout. This handout has links to the not links, but it shows you how to enroll in the Facebook page. It highlights the nimble.org website for study materials. And then it also, on this handout, it mentions that the study team has parent and patient partners that can also assist the family by providing support if they need, in addition to like the Facebook group, for example. It also highlights some cookbooks and blogs that are helpful as well. Next slide. Then for the education, you'll jump into the 3-day diet diary, which is very important to explain in detail. The research coordinator will introduce the role and purpose of a 3-day diet recall, and they should instruct the family on how to return the recall to clinic so that it then can be sent to Seattle Children's Hospital for analysis. The dietitian's role is to instruct the family on how to appropriately complete this 3-day diet recall using a completed example, and that should be attached to the diet log so they can see exactly how we would ideally have it filled out. The dietitian should reemphasize that the diet diaries are critical to evaluate nutritional status and to also adjust the clinical care if necessary. The dietitian should mention that they will follow up with the family by phone based on this log to ask additional questions and then provide interventions if needed based on the diet analysis results. Next slide. And then lastly, you want to review next steps so that everyone's on the same page. The family will be getting so much information in that baseline visit that you want to make sure that you have it bullet outlined kind of what they're to do next. So indicate that they will start a 2-week baseline diet intake to evaluate the symptoms on their current or regular diet. So they should not make any diet changes for the next 2 weeks following this visit. They will not be starting their study diet for 2 weeks after the baseline visit. This is time they should use to prepare for diet transition by batch cooking, meal planning, shopping, finding recipes that they want to try, etc., freezing things. And then they'll also need to complete a 3-day diet recall during this 2-week period and then send it back to the site CRP and dietitian as soon as possible within those 2 weeks, because we want to get a baseline evaluation of what life is like with their current regular diet. They should also collect their stool sample within this time and mail it to Seattle Children's Hospital as instructed by the research coordinator. You'll also want to make sure that everyone's on the same page for the next touch points or the next follow-up visit and that those are scheduled. Next slide. So then the next touch point the dietitian will have with these families, other than receiving their kind of baseline diet 3-day recall within that 2-week period, is the 2-week in-clinic dietitian visit. And you'll see on the next slide where these fall. So we just covered the baseline visit. The patient will have 2 weeks to be on their regular diet before transitioning to diet A, either the SCD or modified SCD. And then 2 weeks after starting diet A, they will have an inpatient dietitian visit. And Lisa will talk more about kind of the next steps with that.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Lisa. Can we have the next slide? Okay. So, yes, there are the 2-week dietitian visit is going to happen for families 2 weeks into the first and second diet periods. So families will do the 2-week baseline period, then they will transition to their first study diet, and 2 weeks after that transition point, they will come back in and have a visit with the dietitian to assess how things are going on their diet as well as weight loss. So this visit is a key touch point for assessing weight loss, and you'll want to remember that the study weight loss parameters are that weight loss of greater than or equal to 5% indicates close monitoring and communication to the CRC and the site PI to complete an adverse event form. This will be an expected adverse event, but we still do need to complete that at that rate of weight loss. And then weight loss of greater than or equal to 7.5% indicates that the patient really needs to be withdrawn from the study and should be communicated again with and work together with the CRC and the site PI to address that as is appropriate and according to the study protocol. Materials that you'll need for the visit are a copy of all the printed produce education handouts. Families will have a packet that will prepare for everybody and send to your site so that you'll be able to hand those out at baseline as Kim described, but you'll want a copy of all those handouts to again be able to go through them as appropriate based on what you're hearing from families and their needs, and remind them of what's there, because there is a lot of information that they need to take in and learn about. You'll want to have the dietitian in clinic follow-up visit, CRF. So that research form is where you'll be documenting, writing down the variables or the information that we need for study purposes and giving that to the CRC to enter into the REDCap database. And then you'll also need another copy of blank 3-day diet diaries for the family to complete at the midpoint of this treatment period if they need those forms again. So they're going to be doing diet diaries 5 times, once during the baseline and then once during each of the diet treatment periods about midway through. And so you'll want to give them those forms if needed. Next slide. Okay, so prior to the visit, what you'll want to do in terms of your preparation is you'll want to review the 2-week RD follow-up SOP or study operating procedure. And there again, as Kim talked about at baseline, that document will have all the details of exactly what needs to be done and how you need to do it. So you'll want to have gone through that so you know exactly what you need to do. You'll want to review the patient's symptom status on the Eureka platform. So the Eureka platform is the digital health tool that we will be using for families in this study. They will be recording their symptoms on a daily basis in a mobile app from the Eureka platform, and you'll be able to see that information as they're doing it and entering it in to the platform. There'll be a provider facing portal to that as well. So what you'll want to be doing is looking prior to that visit at what the patient's symptoms have been like. So stool frequency and consistency per the Bristol stool scale will be tracked. If there are a significant number of stools per day, so greater than 3 or more, you'll want to just notify the GI provider and site PI and get their input based on what you're seeing with that patient and that patient's typical patterns. If stool is consistently very hard or very loose, again, you'll want to talk with the providers and decide if something needs to be done for the patient. Some patients, all patients have the option of tracking weight at home, so some will be doing that on the mobile app and entering it in, and you will be able to look at those values and look at the trends on the Eureka platform. They'll also be tracking pain interference and GI symptoms using PROMIS measures. And again, if you're seeing that their scores for pain or GI symptoms are excessive, and in this case we're calling it greater than a score of 60 on these measures, you'll want to notify the GI provider and just to decide if something needs to be evaluated further. The other thing we ask you to look at on this Eureka platform when you look at it before the patient comes in is, are patients putting their information into the system? Are they tracking? What we're going to be telling patients is that in order to get the best information from this study, you have to input your symptoms on a daily basis or as close to daily as possible. That's how we can give you the best personalized answer on the impact of these diets. So if you see that your patient is doing well, here we've defined it as greater than 75% of the time tracking or entering their data or their symptoms into the app, congratulate the family. We want to keep them know what, sort of a smart choice they're making for, having this study be as useful for them as possible. And if it's less than 75% of the days are being tracked, talk with the CRC and, yourself and the CRC, please work with the family to problem solve what's going on, what are the barriers, why isn't more data getting in, and is there something we can do to help them or to help them increase their understanding of why it's so important for them personally to enter that data as well as the study. Next slide. Maybe having a little bit of a delay on my end on getting the next slide to pop up here. Just wait 1 second. And still not seeing it come through on my end yet. Okay, I've got it. I think we might have lost the current slide. Okay, great. So at the 2-week visit, what you'll want to do is complete your standard nutrition assessment. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to evaluate for possible diet side effects or worsening of disease. You'll ask the patient if she or he is having any new symptoms or symptoms have worsened. You'll, put that together with what you reviewed about their symptoms over the past few weeks on the Eureka platform. If the participant indicates worsening symptoms, discuss with the GI provider, the site PI, the CRC, and decide how to handle that, both clinically for the patient as well as if any adverse events need to be documented per the study protocol. And then you'll also want to evaluate nutrition adequacy. In terms of reviewing any new lab results that might have come in since the last visit, and prepare to recommend supplementation if it's indicated based on what you're seeing from the patient's lab results and from the what they're telling you about their diet. Next slide. Okay, so you'll also want to determine if participants are taking any supplements, probiotics, antacids, verify that supplements are SCD legal if they are using them, and help them, if they're not SCD legal, help figure out what brands they could be using. You'll also want to review if diet staging occurred properly. So those starting with the SCD should have eaten the beginner's SCD for 2 to 3 days and then advanced to the full SCD. Those starting with the modified SCD should have eaten the beginner's SCD for 2 to 3 days, then transitioned to the full SCD for 2 to 3 days, and then finally transitioned by the end of that week to the modified SCD. So evaluating that. Next slide. Okay, and then you'll want to look at the participant's experience on the diet, and this is really important to assess their successes, assess their comfort with the diet and their understanding. They've been on it for a couple of weeks now. How is it going? Assess concerns and challenges of the diet. What's getting away? What in the way? What barriers are they experiencing? Assess if certain foods or food groups are being avoided. For example, if you're they're avoiding yogurt, then what to do about that, for example, or other food groups. Evaluate adherence to the assigned diet using the diet deviation questions. So there will be a couple of questions that ask you based on your interview and time with the patient to evaluate how things have been going with their adherence to the diet, and those will be on the clinical research form, and you'll use those and fill those out while you are in the visit with the patient. And then for those on the modified STD, you'll evaluate adherence to the recommended amounts of starches and sweeteners that are added in on that modified diet to see. It's very important for us to know if patients are meeting or exceeding those recommendations on the modified STD. Next slide. Okay. And then you'll review the adherence questions, like we said, are provided. Those diet deviation questions are provided on the 2-week visit CRF. And so then in terms of diet education, you'll want to reinforce diet education, depending if they're on the STD or MSTD diets. You'll review the handouts that could help and redirect families to the ones that are most appropriate to them. It's really a time to kind of move families forward, take that next step in educating them a little bit more. They'll be ready for a little bit more information based on the diet they're on. And then encourage and motivate families to adhere to the diet and provide any other additional resources or support if needed. Remembering, they can review the Meals Made Simple book, remembering to encourage them to, if Facebook is something that they utilize, to use that Facebook group, or really please don't hesitate to put them in touch with families who are part of the produce study, the produce team. We have some very experienced parents who can be very, very helpful to provide support and ideas of just how to do this in real life with kids to the families who are in this study. So don't hesitate to reach out to that resource. Next slide. Okay, and in terms of education, continuing on what you'll be doing with education, if participant is currently on the STD diet, you will use, at this 2-week visit, you will be teaching them the details of the modified STD diet, because this is your only face-to-face time that you'll have with them before they are ready to switch diets. And so you'll want to educate them on what foods will be added in the amounts. You'll want to educate them on why these specific foods are being added, so they understand a little bit about why they're doing this. And then you'll review the tried and true recipe handouts with the modified STD additions to start to give them some ideas about ways to incorporate these additional items into their diet. The important thing is, though, that you really reinforce with families, you're teaching them today, but they don't do this until the diet transition, which is going to be about 6 weeks from that date. Down the road. So the Eureka app will be tracking for them when it's time to transition to the next diet. So that's how families will know. And your CRC will also be doing that and be working with families to make sure those transitions happen. But the key thing is, to make sure families understand is they're getting the information today in preparation for what's coming next, but they are not to implement it at this point in time. Next slide. I apologize to everybody because I think there's just a little bit of a delay in slides popping up on my end. So at the 2-week visit, some other things that you're going to do is you'll remind the participant to complete the diet diary in about 2 weeks. So we want that diet diary completed somewhere around 3 to 4 week point of this each of the diet phases. So you'll send them home with instructions for, again, filling it out and returning according to the instructions provided by the CRC. They'll work with the CRC to schedule the phone follow-up visit if it's not scheduled already. So that's going to be the next touch point with yourself and this team, the produce team. And so if it may be scheduled already, it may not, but if it isn't, you'll need to get that scheduled next. And then you'll coordinate with the CRC so that he or she can stop in and discuss any upcoming milestones and any clinic follow-ups that need to be scheduled, making sure the participant has the right stool collection kit, and just making sure the participant is really feeling supported in this study. It's a long study, right? It's about 8 months. There's a lot of steps in this process and a lot of new information. So we just want to use these touch points to make sure families get as much support as possible. Next slide. Okay. And so this just shows you, I've talked about the CRFs or the clinical research forms, and this just gives you a sample of what this type of documentation looks like. Most of these questions are things that you're going to be assessing in your contact with a family typically or normally anyway, but we do have the specific things written down on these forms that we need you to ask families and make sure you can answer by the end of the visit. And so what you'll do is likely just take the paper-based version of these forms into the visit with you, fill them out when you're with the family, and then the CRC will enter them into the REDCap study, computerized study database. There are some specific questions on here, like the diet deviation questions, that we'll want you to ask word for word. And so again, you'll use this form to guide you and guide that question language that you use. Next slide. Okay, now the phone follow-up. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the phone follow-ups. So this is, again, you're going to see the same picture over and over because we want to, kind of show you where you are in working with the patient and the family. So we just were talking about the dietitian 2-week in-person visits, which are not circled on this slide, but you can see them in Diet A and Diet B. Those would be the two touch points that you have with families in person after the baseline visit. And then there's also phone-based follow-up, again, to provide support, education, review diet diaries, make sure nutrition is where it should be in families. And those phone-based follow-ups are happening one time during each of the diet phases. So you'll have 4 phone calls total. And they'll happen somewhere around the 4 to 5 week point after the family transitions to each of the diet. Next slide. Okay, so to prepare for those phone follow-ups, again, they occur about 4 to 5 weeks into each diet period. This is a really critical touch point to ensure that participant is doing well on the diet, and to assess their nutritional adequacy, and to recommend alterations to the diet or addition of supplements if those might be needed, and to offer family support and make sure they have the resources, and support they need to keep going. So the materials that you'll need are the completed diet diary. You'll have the diet analysis returned from Seattle Children's team. Hopefully you'll have that and it will be available by the time you're doing the phone call. You'll have the dietitian phone CRF to complete. So again, another one of those clinical research forms with the variables we need to know from this encounter. And then of course have the produce education handouts to refer to. So I want to talk just for a second about the diet analysis. So as we talk about, families complete the 3-day diet diaries. They get them to your CRC, who has the responsibility of doing a very quick turnover and making sure they're working with you to make sure they're complete, because they need to be filled out, as detailed as possible, so we can do a good nutritional analysis, and then quickly getting them, as soon as they're, adequate to get to Seattle, getting them to Seattle, so that Seattle's team has the opportunity to enter those in and get the nutritional analysis back. Ideally, the ideal situation is that you will have that nutritional analysis back by the time you're doing the phone follow-up with families. We do not want you to do a phone follow-up with families if the family has not returned a diet diary. We really need that diet diary back by the time you're doing the phone call, and we'd ask you to reschedule the phone call if they haven't gotten those diet diaries back to us. and everyone is going to work together, to try to get those nutritional analyses back to you before you actually have your phone call with families. But even if it's not back, you can still go ahead based on the completed diet diary you have in hand and reach out to the family and do that phone contact with them. Next slide. Okay, so to prep for this call, the other things you need to do, you'll call this, you're scheduling that you'll have schedule a time for the follow-up phone call. So we want that to be a scheduled call with families. The call is with the parent. The patient is also allowed to participate if they're available, interested, and age appropriate, right? So perhaps some of our older teenagers may want to be part of that call, and that's absolutely fine. The call should occur, like I said, after the diet diary has been returned. It's preferred that you have the nutritional analysis back, but it's not necessary to conduct that call. And if the patient, like I said, just to emphasize this again, has not sent in their diet diary prior to the scheduled phone follow-up, then the follow-up must be rescheduled. And we want all the diet diaries before they're sent to Seattle Children's to be reviewed for completeness and specificity so that they can give us the best nutritional analysis possible. So please work with the participant and the CRC to get that information. And you may, use that phone call as an opportunity if those diet diaries really need to be fleshed out more to get that detail on, into the diet diary at that time. Next slide. Okay, so prior to the phone call, again, review the phone follow-up SOP. Again, another study operating procedure associated with that. So that will have all your details of, what exactly to do in order to do it in the phone call. Review the patient's symptom status on Eureka platform again. So same symptoms we talked about: stool frequency, stool consistency, GI symptoms, pain interference, weight if they are happening to, enter that and track that at home. And if there's anything that looks excessive or, above the criteria that we have listed here in the SOP, please reach out to your CRC and your GI provider and site PI to determine if anything needs to be done about the patient's current symptoms. Evaluate again how patients are doing with putting the information into Eureka. If they're doing well, greater than 75% of the time it's getting in there, congratulate them, reinforce them, remind them how good this is going to be for their data. If it's not going in as frequently, please work with the CRC to problem solve with the family and to remind them again that we can only give them as good an answer from this study about the impacted diet as we have data. Next slide. You'll review, we suggest that you review the EMR if there happen to be any GI encounters since the last study touch point, and look specifically at intervening visits or laboratory tests that could impact your nutrition recommendations. So just stay current with where the participant is when you're reaching out to them in their current symptom status and just GI visit status. Review the diet diary and nutrition analysis if it's back. Look for nutrition adequacy, see if a supplement is indicated. Is there adequate caloric and nutrient intake? And again, please discuss any concerns that you're seeing in preparation for that call with your primary GI and site provider. Next slide. So during the phone follow-up, you'll want to review participant experience on the diet, just like you were doing when the patient was coming in. Assess success, assess comfort with the diet and understanding, assess concerns and challenges, assess again if foods are being avoided. You'll ask that same diet deviation, those adherence questions, word for word, and fill those out. And then for those on the MSCD diet, you will evaluate adherence to the recommended amounts of starches and sweeteners again. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, that reminder of the diet adherence questions. So you'll reinforce diet education on either SCD or MSCD, answer questions, review handouts that could be helpful, motivate the family to, stick with the diets and adhere, and again, provide additional resources based on the family's needs and what you're assessing in that call. Next slide. Then discuss any observations or questions that you found, when you reviewed the Eureka platform prior to the phone visit. If they're having looser stools or stools have changed, please let the family know this may be due to diet changes. If they're reporting increased pain interference, evaluate if the patient is eating too much of one food, assess if it's due to hunger or possible constipation, and again, treat as you would and or involve the primary GI and site PI if that seems appropriate. And then you'll discuss the adherence that you saw. Next slide. And then you'll review the diet diary with the family, discuss variety, if they're eating too many prepackaged foods, troubleshoot if they're not consuming foods from each of the food groups, ask if specific foods are being avoided, confirm that the participant is taking recommended supplements and that the brand of the supplements are SCD legal, and provide recommendations for new supplements if indicated per the diet analysis. So assessing their nutrition, problem solving with them, and then giving the recommended support. Next slide. And then after the phone call, in the case that the nutritional analysis is returned after the phone call, you didn't have it, you just have the diet diary and new information about the adequacy is identified, please contact the family and address as appropriate. If the participant indicates new or worsening symptoms during the phone call, please reach out to the GI provider, the site PI, and the CRC with this information and document, work with them to document as appropriate as an adverse event, and get an appropriate follow-up plan in place as is appropriate for that patient and what's going on with them. And then close the loop with the CRC to connect the families with resources to meet needs identified during the call, because they can do a lot of that legwork for you, but just make sure that you're looping them in and they can know what needs to be done. Next slide. And then again, just an example to you of what these CRFs are looking like that you'll be asked to fill out during the study. Next slide. Okay, and then finally the standard medical visit. If you can go on to the next slide. So the standard medical visit is going to occur at the end of the first diet period. So this is about 8 weeks after starting diet A, and it will be a standard visit that happens with the patient's primary GI provider during the study, and it's an opportunity, if appropriate, for diet education to also happen. Next slide. So at the standard medical visit, participant returns to clinic for a regularly scheduled medical visit at the end of the first diet period. If possible, coordinate with the CRC to be able to briefly stop in and say hi to families, see how it's going, see if they need any additional resources or support or questions answered, and review the clinic note to ensure there are no concerns related to weight loss, nutritional inadequacy that require follow-up on your end. If there is, please connect with the GI provider, CRC, make a plan to connect with the participant. Next slide. So there's not a specific requirement that the RD would see the patient at that visit, but if you're able to, or your site PI or the GI provider ask you to do so, please do so and provide the needed support. So in summary, the dietitian is a pivotal member of this research team and plays a lead role in the following study touch points: the baseline visit, critical for education and really teaching the families what they need to know to do the study related to the diets. The 2-week follow-ups that are occurring 2 weeks into the first and second diet period, really key touch points for assessing how families are doing and getting them more education and the needed resources and the support. And then those phone visits at the midpoint of each of the diet periods are really critical for assessing nutrition and making sure that families are that patients are getting the nutrition that they need and the supplementation that they need and the answers to their questions. The RD role and responsibilities for the produce study are outlined in detail in the study operating procedures or SOP documents. We reviewed them at a high level today. So, again, if you have any questions at any time during the study, as you're reviewing these slides, as you're reviewing the SOPs, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We ask the produce research team about the details of these SOPs. If you have questions about the diet, how to implement the diet with various patients, etc., please don't hesitate to reach out, because we have many, many people who are really expert at using these diets on this team, who are very willing and able and interested to help and answer your questions. I think that's the last slide.
Yes.
We can, yeah. Okay, great. Kim, I'm going to turn it back over to you to just see if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Perfect. No, I think that covers it. I know it's a lot of information that we talked about today, but hopefully with those SOP documents, it'll be really clear with each touch point what needs to be covered. Like Lisa said, feel free to reach out to us with questions that come up outside of these webinars that we welcome that, and we really want to hear like things that we haven't thought through or timelines that you guys think can be challenging, anything like that. We want to troubleshoot with you. So thank you so much for listening in, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, and don't hesitate to ask your questions. If there's 11 different sites working with us, so if you have a question that we haven't answered, or I can guarantee you that some of the other sites will have that too. So your questions are really helpful, because I'm sure there's things that will pop up for other people, and we'll make sure that we share them with everybody, so that we're all continuing to learn together in this. So thank you.
Yeah, we're all troubleshooting in different ways depending on how kind of our site flow. So feel free to bring up those glitches or nuances that you are struggling with, and we can help you with that.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.